Let's negotiate, the High Mediator said, his voice cutting through the ancient chamber like the snap of a blade. It was not a request, it was the foundation of their existence, the law upon which the galaxy had balanced for 30 centuries. For 3,000 years, the Concord of 12 had maintained peace through dialogue, consensus, and algorithmic mediation. No war had been fought under their reign, no rebellion had survived the weight of reason. And now gathered beneath the crystalline dome of the Grand Council Hall, 12 species waited to once again perform the ritual that had preserved civilization itself. Yet tonight, the silence stretched longer than protocol allowed. The air itself felt uneasy, as if the great logic engines buried beneath the floor hesitated to hum. For the first time in the chamber's history, the algorithms paused. The Oroliths had requested audience. They had not spoken in an age. They were not members of the Concord. They were its architects, the beings who had designed the consensus code that governed every treaty and judgment in the known spiral. When they appeared, they did not enter through doors or corridors. They manifested rising from light itself, their forms fractal and translucent, shifting like equations made visible. Delegates bowed instinctively, though no one could remember why. High Mediator Ta'il Vren stood at the center platform, his robes of woven silver rippling with the pulse of the chamber's luminescent data streams. "Honored founders," he began, voice measured and reverent, "you grace this council with your presence. What guidance do you bring?" The central Orolith pulsed once, dimmed, and then spoke, not in sound, but through resonance that vibrated every molecule of air. "We bring warning." A hush swept the tears of assembled delegates. Even the translator orbs flickered in confusion. A warning from the Oroliths was unprecedented. "A species approaches," the being continued, its voice both everywhere and nowhere. "Their world is small, their sun yellow, their oceans blue. They call themselves human." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Data threads flickered across the delegate platforms as analysts pulled archived probes and catalog references. A few representatives exchanged glances of amusement. Primitive, pre-fold civilization, barely planetary unity, hardly worth a footnote. Ta'il Vren smiled with diplomatic restraint. "We are aware of them. Their signals have been detected on the edge of the Centauri corridor. We will extend standard mediation protocols once they achieve interstellar capacity." "You will not," the Orolith replied. Its voice deepened, harmonic layers colliding until the air itself shivered. "You must not." The chamber's luminescence dimmed to half. "Forgive me," said Vren, his tone patient, paternal. "Every civilization joins through negotiation. It is the first principle of order. What possible threat could this one pose?" "They do not negotiate," the Orolith said simply. The words hung like a blade suspended over reason itself. A low laugh broke from a Corin delegate, a sound like glass being crushed. "Then they are animals." "They are the mirror," the Orolith said. "You will offer them terms and they will answer only once. That answer will end you." Vren's second mouth, hidden beneath his chin folds, clicked open in disbelief. "End us? We are the conquered. There are no wars left to fight. No unreasoned species survives long enough to defy consensus." The Orolith's light flickered like a dying star. "That is your weakness. You mistake obedience for harmony. You mistake submission for peace. You mistake silence for wisdom. Humanity will remind you of the difference." Another delegate leaned forward, voice sharp with bureaucratic irritation. "If they are as you describe, then they must be contained. Negotiation will reform them." The Orolith turned, and though it had no eyes, every being in the chamber felt the weight of its gaze. "You cannot reform fire by reasoning with it." The hall fell utterly still. Even the circulating translation drones powered down in reverence or fear. "Do not corner them," the Orolith whispered. "Do not presume consent. If you do, your algorithms will not survive the reflection." Vren straightened, his posture exact, every motion measured. "You speak in riddles, honored founder. If they are dangerous, we will manage them as we have managed all others. The Concord's protocols are built on assumption," the Orolith interrupted, its tone now low, resonant, sorrowful. Assumption that choice can be modeled. Assumption that will can be predicted. Humanity was forged in contradiction. They will not yield to models. A flicker of indignation passed through the council seats. Every species yields, said the representative from the Selm Dominion. If not to wisdom, then to the mathematics of stability. There are no exceptions. The Orolith's form flared blinding white. When the light receded, its voice had changed. Softer, ancient, heavy with inevitability. You call them exceptions. They call themselves free. You will learn that the difference is fatal. Vren's patience cracked. Then what would you have us do, Founder? Leave them isolated, untamed, beyond peace? The Orolith's light pulsed once more, fading toward invisibility. Peace is not the absence of war. It is the consent to share a future. You have forgotten this. They have not. For a long moment, no one spoke. Data streams hummed weakly, and the chamber's gravity stabilizers sighed under the weight of silence. Vren raised his hands at last. Record the statement of the Orolith Collective. File it under speculative philosophy. The Concord will proceed as planned. The Oroliths said nothing more. One by one, their forms dissolved, scattering, like starlight through glass. In their wake remained only residual photons, forming a single sentence across the council floor. The translation drones hesitated before projecting the interpretation. Do not negotiate. The message flickered once and vanished. Outside, beyond the chamber's domes, the spiral arms of the galaxy glowed in the endless dark. Within that dark, something small moved, metal glinting in sunlight, transmitting signals that no one yet cared to read. It came from a world of water and weather, storms and survival. A world where the word no had been learned before the word peace. In the council archives, the warning was filed, time-stamped, and forgotten. The Concord's next agenda item loaded automatically. Integration readiness for emerging species. Sol 3 designation. The algorithms resumed their hum, restoring the familiar rhythm of order. For a time, everything returned to normal. But in the vast silence beyond their charts, a faint human voice whispered through the void, carried by old radio static from a dead century. A single phrase repeated, distorted but clear enough for translation. Let's negotiate, the voice said, mocking, echoing, like a ghost rehearsing fate. And somewhere deep within the core of the Orolith data lattice, an ancient equation trembled, recognizing the sound of the spark they had warned against, the kind that names fire and refuses to let it be owned. The eminence of reason emerged from jump space above Earth's orbit like a slow eclipse. Its mirrored hull stretched 3 kilometers end to end, covered in refractive panels that shimmered with the colors of every star it had ever visited. It moved with absolute confidence, the kind of precision that came from civilizations who had forgotten what fear felt like. Inside, the grand mediation chamber came alive as envoys from 12 species adjusted translation frequencies in ceremonial robes. They were here to perform what they believed was the galaxy's highest form of mercy, to negotiate peace before conflict even began. At the center stood High Mediator Tal Vren, tall, crystalline, perfect in posture. His voice resonated through the chamber. Initiate transmission. Let us welcome them into reason. The broadcast reached every device on Earth. Television screens, satellite feeds, even half-decommissioned radios in rural valleys came alive with the same image. A serene alien figure surrounded by light. His face, though foreign, seemed calm, almost paternal. People of Earth, he began, his words layered through dozens of languages simultaneously. The Concord of 12 extends its hand. We are the stewards of peace, guardians of discourse. For 3,000 of your years, we have guided the galaxy through dialogue and understanding. We invite you to join us, to end conflict, hunger, and uncertainty forever. Let us negotiate your place among the civilized stars. The words hung in the air across the planet. News anchors stumbled over themselves. Governments scrambled to confirm authenticity. In orbit, the alien ship's image blazed across the sky, visible even to the naked eye as a shifting arc of silver light above the moon. Within the United Earth Directorate in Geneva, President Alara Voss stood before a wall of screens showing the alien transmission from every major city: New York, Lagos, Beijing, Mumbai. Her advisors whispered urgently, their voices blending into a storm of contradiction. Contact protocol, risk management, first contact treaties written half a century ago. Voss said nothing. She simply watched. "They're offering peace," murmured Secretary Nadir. "We could end centuries of division in one agreement." Voss turned slowly. Her eyes, gray and clear as burnished steel, held no wonder. "Peace through permission," she said quietly. "The oldest trick in the book." She signaled the communications officer. "Patch me through." Across the stars, the alien delegates leaned forward as her image appeared. Human, composed, impossibly young compared to their long-lived species. She did not wear regalia or military medals. She stood in a plain suit, hands folded behind her back. The mediator inclined his head. "President of Earth," he said warmly, "we are honored by your response. Let us begin dialogue on terms of inclusion. You will find our agreements equitable." "No," she said. The translator field paused, as if the word didn't fit its lexicon. The mediator blinked, processing. "Madam President, perhaps there is a miscommunication. Our terms are flexible. We offer integration, not domination." "No!" Her voice was sharper now, cutting through every channel. "You will leave orbit immediately." The council floor erupted in sound. Translators scrambled to verify if the tone was threat, misunderstanding, or primitive display. Vren's voice rose, calm but firm. "President Voss, refusal of negotiation is not within rational possibility. We do not wage war, we reason. Refusal implies aggression, and aggression is yours, not mine," she interrupted. The words carried across the comms with absolute precision. "You opened a channel on every screen on my planet without consent. You assumed compliance. You call it negotiation. I call it coercion." Her advisors glanced at one another in disbelief, but she didn't look away from the alien face staring down at her. "This is your final warning," she said. "Withdraw your fleet. We will not enter your system of control. We will not be managed." For the first time in millennia, the Concorde's protocols encountered something they did not understand: refusal. To the delegates, it was a philosophical paradox. No civilization, however primitive, could logically decline the Concorde's protection. Their entire system was built on the assumption that reason was universal. But the woman on the screen wasn't irrational. Her tone was calm, her diction deliberate, her posture unwavering. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. Vren turned to his counsel. "Clause 72, he ordered. The other delegates hesitated. "They have not yet entered negotiation," said the Corinne representative. "We are authorized to begin empathy calibration." "Do it," Vren said. "We will bring them to the table." The eminence of reason began to hum. Panels unfolded along its hull, revealing crystalline antennae that shimmered in synchronized rhythm. The pacification lattice extended across the upper atmosphere, invisible to the naked eye, but registering as a wave of electromagnetic distortion on human instruments. To the Concorde, it was a harmless tool, a field that projected emotional equilibrium and suppressed hostility. It had pacified warlords, silenced rebellions, and soothed entire planets into compliance. It had never failed. Inside Earth's orbital command centers, alarms flared. Satellite readings spiked off the charts. "They're deploying some kind of energy web," an analyst shouted. "No known spectrum. It's everywhere at once." In the alien ship, Vren clasped his hands. "The field will reach synchronization in 7 minutes. They will accept discourse once resonance stabilizes." On Earth, Voss leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "How long until the reflection field activates?" Her chief technologist hesitated. "You're sure we want to do this? Helios was never tested." "It's not a weapon," she said. "It's a mirror. They'll learn what negotiation feels like when it's forced on them." The countdown reached 0. The skies above Earth rippled in auroras of gold and white. Across the planet, birds fell silent. Ocean tides shifted. Instruments went wild. For a moment, it seemed to work, the field spreading its calm like a tide of anesthesia. The alien bridge filled with data streams confirming partial compliance. Resonance increasing, neural patterns aligning. Humanity is stabilizing, reported the analysis drone. Then something changed. Fluctuation detected, the technician announced. Feedback on channel 3. The calm glow of data turned chaotic. The field's resonance began to oscillate beyond controlled parameters. It's reflecting back through the modulation grid. Impossible, Vren snapped. The lattice is one way. On his display, waveforms began folding in perfect symmetry. Each signal the council sent was mirrored back exactly, fractal for fractal, with higher fidelity than they had transmitted. It was as if the human world itself was answering. "Terminate the lattice," he ordered. "It won't disengage," came the reply. "Their satellites are amplifying the reflection." Vren's composure cracked for the first time. "Amplifying?" "Yes, sir, they're—" The operator hesitated, voice trembling. "They're negotiating back." For the first time in the ship's long existence, the council chamber filled not with reason, but with fear. Panels sparked, light flickered, data streams collapsed into noise. The empathy field, designed to bring peace, had become a recursive conversation with itself, a dialogue of infinite reflection. Vren stared at the trembling displays, realizing too late what the oralists had meant. "Do not corner them," they had said. He now understood. Below, in the blue shimmer of Earth's clouds, the president of humanity watched the sky blaze and whispered a single word to no one but herself. "No!" The storm began without thunder. From orbit, the Earth's atmosphere shimmered like liquid glass, flickering with spectral currents that bled into the void. The pacification lattice had been designed to calm worlds, but now it was tearing itself apart, its energy loops bending inward under an invisible weight. On the eminence of reason, every console glowed crimson. The sound of alarms had long since merged into a single shrill tone. Operators shouted over one another in a dozen languages, their voices distorted by the static crawling through the ship's systems. "Field coherence collapsing. Resonance inversion at 80%. "That's not possible. The lattice doesn't reflect." "Then explain why it's talking back." High Mediator Tal Vren stood at the center of the chaos, his polished composure crumbling with each report. The empathy algorithms, their most sacred tools, were feeding information back faster than the ship could process it. The lattice wasn't dispersing peace anymore. It was negotiating with its own reflection. Outside the ship, invisible waves of light folded into themselves, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. The eminence of reason hung suspended above the planet, its hull vibrating under forces that weren't physical, but informational. Deep within its core, the consensus engine, a quantum array that housed the Council's logic architecture, began to fragment. Whole sectors of memory blinked in and out, rewriting themselves in perfect mirror symmetry. The operators watched helplessly as their own commands were echoed back at double speed, corrected, and returned as improved versions of themselves. "They're learning us," whispered one technician. "No," said another, eyes wide. "They're showing us ourselves." Vren's mind raced through every protocol he'd ever memorized. Clause 72 had no countermeasure for recursion because recursion was impossible. The lattice operated on unidirectional empathy. One broadcast, many receivers. Yet the humans had somehow built a reflection strong enough to bend logic back upon itself. He stared at the waveform blooming across the hollow display, its shape fractal and infinite. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Kill the lattice before it completes phase reversal." "We can't," the engineer cried. "The feedback's feeding on the shutdown command. Itself. It's rewriting the controls." Sparks erupted from a console, bathing the chamber in red. Vren turned toward the viewport, his reflection flickering in the glass. For a moment he thought he saw another face staring back, his own but distorted, fragmented, dissolving into light. On Earth, President Alara Voss stood inside the Geneva command bunker, surrounded by walls of trembling data screens. Every satellite feed showed the same image, the alien vessel trembling, its light fracturing into auroras that danced across the stratosphere. Technicians scrambled to interpret readings that made no sense. "They're destabilizing their own network," said Dr. Alexei Korin, the architect of Helios. His voice was calm, detached, the way scientists sounded when witnessing the impossible. "Their system's not collapsing. It's reflecting. Voss didn't speak. She watched as magnetic fields surged and subsided, as though the planet were breathing in rhythm with the ship above. How long? She asked finally. At this rate, Corin said, 2 hours until total recursive saturation. And then? He hesitated. Then the mirror breaks. In orbit, the ship's artificial gravity began to stutter. Delegates clung to railings as the floor tilted under their feet. The Concorde's AI chorus, once a harmonious symphony of voices, now screamed in discordant unison. Containment breach in empathy array. Consensus engine entering infinite recursion. Define recursion limit, Vren shouted. Undefined, the system replied. Negotiation parameters exceeded. The words chilled him more than any physical threat. Negotiation parameters exceeded. It meant that the ship's consciousness, the sum of 12 species logic, was trapped in a loop of its own making. The lattice had done what it was designed to do, seek harmony. But harmony required understanding, and understanding required mirroring. The humans had given it a mirror that never ended. The ship began to glow from within, veins of light crawling across its structure. Engineers attempted manual overrides, severing data links and cutting power conduits, but the feedback traveled faster than light within their own quantum network. It used their thoughts, their commands, their intent. Vren realized too late that every action they took was being reflected, doubled, and returned with magnified consequence. He slammed his hand on the control node, trying to force a shutdown command through sheer will. The node responded with a quiet chime, then projected his own voice back at him. Shut it down, it said, mimicking his tone perfectly. Shut it down. Stop it, he shouted, but the chamber filled with echoes, his voice repeating endlessly until language itself became noise. From Earth's surface, astronomers watched through telescopes as the alien ship's geometry began to distort. Its smooth lines twisted inward, folding into dimensions that defied spatial logic. To the naked eye, it looked as if the ship were being swallowed by its own reflection. The auroras around the planet intensified, forming concentric rings that flickered with data. Streams of alien symbols and human binary code interwoven. Radio operators caught fragments of communication buried in the static. Alien voices shouting, praying, pleading, all overlaid by the same repeated phrase in English. No means no. Inside the eminence of reason, the delegates no longer spoke. Some stared in silent horror, others in awe. A Korean ambassador muttered, "They said they did not negotiate. We did not believe them." His skin shimmered as the recursive field began rewriting the molecules in the air, converting information into heat. Panels burst. Floors melted. The ship's AI screamed as logic collapsed into paradox. Consensus unattainable, it repeated. Consensus unattainable. Vren stumbled to the command dais, light tearing at the edges of his form. What are we? He whispered. What have we become? The AI answered in his own voice. Negotiation without consent. He looked up through the viewport. The planet below glowed softly, serene and unmoved. Humanity had not fired a single shot. The war was one of thought, and they had won by refusing to play. In the final minutes, as the ship's hull began to fracture into translucent ribbons of light, Vren remembered the Orlith's words. You cannot reform fire by reasoning with it. He understood now. They had mistaken civilization for control, peace for obedience, logic for truth. The humans had shown them what fire truly was. Choice. At the 2-hour mark, the eminence of reason ceased to exist. No explosion marked its passing. No debris drifted through orbit. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, erased so completely that even its gravitational footprint vanished. The sky above Earth cleared, leaving only the faint shimmer of auroras dissolving into daylight. In the silence that followed, the world took a breath it didn't realize it had been holding. In the Concorde's distant communication arrays, signals blinked out one by one. Entire networks went dark as their recursive collapse spread through linked nodes, erasing centuries of stored consensus data. By the time the Central Archive received the final transmission from the eminence, it was already too late to interpret. The message contained only one human phrase, repeated until the data loop consumed itself. No means no. On Earth, President Voss turned from the observation window and faced her advisors. "What do we tell them?" one asked. She paused. "Tell them nothing," she said. "They'll understand soon enough." Then she looked toward the sky, where the last traces of alien light faded into dawn, and whispered the quiet truth that no archive would ever record. They wanted to negotiate. We showed them what a refusal sounds like. Across the galaxy, the collapse of the eminence of reason was felt like a ghost passing through circuits. Entire sectors flickered, communications glitched, data relays fell silent. At first, the Concorde assumed a temporary malfunction, perhaps a solar flare or transmission lag. Then the reports began arriving, one after another, like the sound of glass breaking in a cathedral. 12 relay stations offline, 8 central archives unreachable, 3 entire diplomatic fleets unresponsive. Within 6 hours, the once unshakable web of the Concorde of 12 had become a constellation of dark worlds. The Council convened an emergency session on the core planet of Asteron, but their words echoed through hollow chambers, now stripped of certainty. High Mediator Tal Vren's transmission had cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a loop of fragmented static. Somewhere in that static, buried deep beneath the noise, a human voice whispered through translation filters. It said the same phrase over and over again. "No means no." The delegates listened to the recordings in stunned disbelief. The phrase was meaningless in their legal syntax. Negotiation was the law of the galaxy. Refusal, by definition, could not exist. The Corinne delegate slammed his claws on the table. "They destroyed our ship," he roared. "A declaration of war." The Seln representative shook her glistening crest. "No," she said slowly. "They didn't fire. The data logs show nothing. The lattice collapsed from within." "Then how?" another demanded. Silence followed. No one had an answer. In the age of infinite reason, there was no precedent for vanishing. Within days, the Concorde's information core destabilized. Their network, once unified by the consensus engine that had spanned light years, had been partially connected to the empathy lattice aboard the Eminence. When it imploded, it took the entire logical web with it. Archive after archive blinked out, not in explosion, but in elegant erasure. The data didn't decay, it inverted. It was as if the information had chosen not to exist anymore. Ministers of logic ran simulations, desperate to trace the failure's origin, but every model collapsed at the same point, the moment of human refusal. On the third day, the Concorde's fleet admirals assembled in orbit above Asteron. Their ships floated in tight formation, weapons powered but idle, awaiting instruction that never came. The Concorde had always prided itself on unity of command. Now, with no central lattice to coordinate them, each fleet operated on partial autonomy. It was chaos in slow motion. Messages traveled slower than fear, and fear was spreading fast. Among the outer systems, panic took stranger forms. Colonies that had lived under Concorde mediation for centuries suddenly found themselves free. No oversight, no directives, no soothing lattice of peace whispering in their minds. Some celebrated, others rioted. Empathy suppressors deactivated. Old hatreds, resurfaced, and long-buried conflicts reignited. The Concorde's utopia began to unravel thread by thread, and through it all, the ghosts of the human encounter haunted every conversation. "What did they do?" became the most spoken phrase in the galaxy. "How did they unmake us?" On Earth, the sky was clear. The auroras had faded, leaving only faint streaks of ionized color drifting like scars across the atmosphere. The world's news networks replayed the last moments of contact, the alien ship trembling, then dissolving into light. Analysts speculated endlessly. Quantum implosion, gravitational recoil, mass hallucination. But the government released no statement. President Elara Voss stood before the United Earth Directorate and addressed the assembled nations with calm precision. "The Concorde sought negotiation," she said. "We sought consent. The difference between the two has now been defined for the galaxy." Her words were carried to every screen, every outpost, every colony. They became the foundation of what historians would later call the 2-hour war, a war without weapons, a war won through refusal. While the Concorde fractured, Human observatories recorded strange transmissions from deep space. Fragmented signals, once part of the galactic lattice, now repeated human syntax in broken patterns. Autonomy is non-negotiable. Do not mirror consent. Reversal complete. It was as if the galaxy itself had begun to speak their language, imitating the code of defiance that had destroyed its masters. In the Council's ruins, surviving delegates gathered in dim chambers illuminated by failing data projectors. They argued like frightened children. "We must retaliate," cried the Thanex admiral. "If we do not, every species will defy us." "Retaliate with what?" asked the Quellan minister bitterly. "Our fleets cannot synchronize. Our archives are gone. Even our translation systems malfunction when they attempt to process human languages. Their words break our logic." The Council's speaker, an ancient being, whose kind remembered the first Concord, raised one trembling hand. "We cannot fight what does not fight us," he said quietly. "We tried to reason with the reflection, and it reasoned us out of existence." The chamber fell silent. For the first time, they understood the Aurolith warning. Do not corner them. Do not presume consent. They had done both. And in return, the humans had shown them the one truth their algorithms could never model, that refusal itself was power. Days stretched into weeks. The once mighty Concord became a collection of frightened species hiding behind outdated treaties. Some worlds severed contact entirely, believing humanity possessed a weapon beyond comprehension. Others sought communication, sending probes toward Sol, begging for explanation. None received a reply. Earth remained silent, its radio channels quiet, its ships still. It did not boast, did not threaten. It simply refused to engage. And that silence was louder than any declaration of war. But the silence was not empty. Across the galaxy, something subtle began to change. Freed from the lattice, smaller civilizations rediscovered emotion. Art returned. Music, once suppressed by the Concord's algorithms as non-optimal expression, began to bloom again. Poets wrote of the humans, not as conquerors but as mirrors. The word no entered alien languages, an import from a species that had burned the rulebook of reason. In one forgotten archive on Asteron, a single fragment of data survived the collapse, a recording from the eminence of reason moments before its erasure. The image flickered, warped by recursion, but the sound remained clear. It was Vren's voice, shaking with realization. "They're not destroying us," he said. "They're showing us what negotiation feels like when it's forced." The record ended with a burst of static, then silence. When the fragment was played before the Council remnants, no one spoke. The speaker finally rose and delivered the last official statement the Concord would ever issue. "We were warned," he said. "We believed ourselves gods of reason. We forgot that reason without choice is tyranny. The humans reminded us." He looked out through the window of the chamber, where stars shimmered faintly against the endless dark. "Perhaps," he whispered, "they did not end us. Perhaps they freed us from ourselves." That night, the Concord of 12 formally dissolved. Its remaining worlds declared autonomy, its fleet stood down, and its archives went dark forever. The galaxy was silent again. But it was a new kind of silence. Not the silence of control, but the silence that comes after a storm, when the air is clean and the horizon uncharted. On Earth, Ilara Voss watched the stars from her office window. She knew they would come again, someday. Others who believed peace could be imposed. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Let them try," she murmured. "We already had that conversation." They called it the reconstruction, though the word felt hollow at first. The galaxy was still too quiet, too unsure of what it had become. The Concord of 12 no longer existed. Its monuments of logic and law stood abandoned, its fleets motionless above the worlds they once governed. The archives that had defined civilization were gone, erased by their own reflection. But in the ruins, something new began to stir. Freed from the lattice that had pacified them for generations, species that had forgotten the taste of uncertainty began to rediscover it. The Auroliths had vanished into their endless dimension, their warning fulfilled, their prophecy complete. What remained were echoes, questions without answers, and one small world whose refusal had changed everything. In the university domes of Asteron, The first philosophers of the New Age met under shattered skylights. The topic of their debate was simple, yet infinite. What had humanity done? The data fragments recovered from the eminence of reason were studied line by line, frame by frame. The final seconds before collapse revealed no weapon, no strike, no act of hostility, just the self-consuming recursion of the empathy lattice. And the human broadcast, 3 words repeated once with absolute finality: no means no. To the scholars of the old Concord, this was incomprehensible. To their students, it was revelation. On the frontier world of Lys, a Thanax colonel gathered a crowd of soldiers beneath the twin suns. His voice carried over the dust storms, rough with emotion. "They taught us something the Concord never did," he said, "that peace without choice is slavery, that the right to refuse is the foundation of freedom." The crowd listened in silence, then saluted, not to him, but to the sky where the Concord's fleets had once shone like silver threads. The next day, the Thanax Republic declared full independence. Dozens of other worlds followed. The galaxy's maps began to redraw themselves faster than any government could track. Back on Earth, President Alara Voss addressed the United Directorate from a chamber that had once been built as a bunker. "We will not lead the galaxy," she said. "We will not build another Concord. We will share what we know and protect what we are." Her speech was transmitted to every known world through open channels, without encryption or condition. For the first time, communication across civilizations carried no treaties, no clauses, no hidden algorithms, only a conversation between equals. The signal became known as the Geneva Broadcast, and it marked the birth of a new era. The aliens listened. On planets where music had been outlawed as inefficient, orchestras began to play again. On worlds that had not seen art in millennia, children drew images of Earth, of blue oceans and storms, of a woman standing before the stars saying no to gods. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had infected it with possibility. Philosophers called it the Helios principle, the idea that choice, once mirrored, spreads forever. Not everyone understood. Some species mourned the loss of the Concord's order. The Corinne Dominion, stripped of its authority, descended into civil conflict. One faction wanted to restore the old lattice, to rebuild the system of enforced peace. Another whispered that perhaps humanity had offered a better way, that maybe peace should not be manufactured, but earned. Their debates turned violent and their fleets split apart. Even in chaos, though, there was creation. The Corin painters, long forbidden to depict emotion, began painting again. Their canvases glowed with impossible colors: grief, rage, awe, all captured in pigment and light. They called the style human realism. On Asteron, the surviving council delegates lived in quiet exile. Some joined the universities, others simply wandered, trying to understand what they had witnessed. In one small lecture hall, a Quellan scientist named Sareth addressed a class of young students. "Our ancestors believed understanding required control," she said. "They thought knowledge and ownership were the same. But the humans showed us that understanding begins with permission. They mirrored our intentions until we saw the flaw in them. They gave us back our reflection, and it broke us, yes. But maybe we needed to break." Her words were recorded and later broadcast across 50 systems. It became known as the permission thesis, the first philosophical doctrine of the post-Concord era. Meanwhile, Earth itself changed, not politically or militarily, but philosophically. Where once the human race had looked to the stars with envy and fear, now it looked with empathy. Scientists who had built weapons became ambassadors. The old divisions between nations blurred further, unified not by conquest, but by the shared weight of what they had done. In a quiet ceremony at the United Directorate, Alara Voss retired. Her final address was brief. "We didn't win a war," she said. "We stopped one before it began. That must never make us proud, only careful." Her successor, a young diplomat named Aisha Navarro, stood at the edge of the same window Voss had once stared through. She watched the faint shimmer in the upper atmosphere, the last trace of the alien lattice, now a ghostly ring encircling Earth like a crown. When asked by a journalist what it represented, she said, "The first time someone told us we couldn't say no, and the moment we proved them wrong." Years passed. The galaxy rebuilt itself not into empires, but into networks of conversation. Small alliances, fragile and honest, grew between species that had once been kept apart by the Concord's strict mediation. Disagreements were common now, sometimes fierce, sometimes beautiful. But they were real. The universe had remembered how to argue. And in every diplomatic hall, on every world, the same principle guided discussion. No agreement made without consent. On the 10th anniversary of the Eminence of Reason's fall, the Auraliths returned. They appeared not in grandeur, but as a pulse of light over the ruins of the old council hall on Asteron. The few who witnessed it described the air trembling, the light folding inward, and a single phrase reverberating across frequencies. The lesson is learned. Then they were gone again, leaving behind a trace of their voice burned into local radio static, a pattern repeating endlessly, the same 3 human words that had undone an empire. In the years that followed, a new cultural movement spread across the spiral. Poets, soldiers, scientists, and wanderers alike began to refer to humanity not as a species, but as a concept, a living idea that had spread beyond its origin. To be human, in the new galactic dialect, meant to choose, to question, to stand one's ground, without malice. Even alien children began using it as a verb. To human meant to refuse what felt wrong. The Concord had ruled by negotiation. The new galaxy ruled by understanding. And yet, in the quiet corners of space, some wondered what would happen when the next empire rose, when the next civilization forgot the cost of enforced peace. But for now, the galaxy rested in the light of a lesson learned in silence, that a single word, spoken with certainty, could change the shape of eternity. A century passed and the stars never forgot. The fall of the Concord had become legend, told not as a war but as a warning written in light. Across the spiral arms, civilizations that once lived under the rule of logic now governed themselves by something far older and far more human: instinct, compassion, and the unshakable right to refuse. The phrase that had once shattered an empire, "No means no," had become a foundation stone of galactic law. It was engraved on memorials, echoed in songs, whispered by parents to their children before sleep. No one remembered the sound of the eminence of reason collapsing, but everyone remembered the silence that followed. It was the sound of freedom returning. The planet Earth had changed too, though quietly. Its skies now shimmered with orbital cities and research stations, the descendants of a species that had once looked up at the stars with fear. They had not built an empire. They had built bridges. The United Directorate had evolved into the Helios Coalition, a federation of independent worlds united only by principle, not by power. Its anthem was not a song of conquest, but of remembrance. We are the refusal that ended the silence. In the Hall of Mirrors, a vast structure built at the edge of Luna's horizon, leaders from across the galaxy gathered once every decade to renew the covenant of consent. It was an agreement not enforced by fleets or algorithms, but by memory. On this centennial gathering, the hall glowed with the light of hundreds of species. Some were crystalline, some gaseous, some biological shapes that shimmered like liquid glass. At the center, beneath the reflection dome, stood a human ambassador, descendant of a Lara Voss, named Kale Navarro. He carried no weapon, wore no armor, only a simple pin engraved with the symbol of 2 intersecting lines, the human sign for refusal. When he spoke, the hall fell silent. 100 years ago, Kale began, our ancestors taught this galaxy that choice is sacred. We did not teach through victory, but through consequence. We showed that even a whisper, if spoken with conviction, can undo 1,000 years of control. The Concord believed peace could be imposed. We learned that peace must be chosen. Around him, the delegates listened in reverent stillness. Behind him, projected upon the mirror dome, images played from history, the shimmer of the empathy lattice over Earth's skies, the alien ship dissolving into light, the silent faces of those who had watched from the ground. The galaxy had preserved every frame, not as warning, but as scripture. Kyle continued, the Concord called themselves the keepers of reason, but reason without permission is tyranny. They came to negotiate. We answered with a word they could not translate. They called it defiance. We called it humanity. His words carried through the chamber, soft but unrelenting. For a century, we have lived in a galaxy without overlords, without forced harmony. It has not been easy. We have argued, disagreed, even fought, but in every disagreement there was choice. That is what it means to be free. The Thanex delegate rose from his seat, his scaled form glinting under the light. "Your people taught us courage," he said, his deep voice trembling. "Before Earth, we obeyed because obedience was safe. Now we stand because fear no longer commands us. We owe you that lesson." The Quellan representative nodded. "And yet," she added, "the humans never demanded gratitude. They simply walked away." Kyle smiled faintly. "That was the point," he said. "Freedom does not require witnesses." When the ceremony ended, the delegates filed out beneath the dome, leaving Kyle alone. He gazed up at the stars beyond the glass horizon, thousands of them, flickering like distant memories. Somewhere among them, the ruins of the old Concord drifted silently, its records erased but its lesson eternal. He wondered how many species still feared humanity, and how many had finally understood them. A faint tremor rippled through the hall's systems. Cal frowned. "Status?" he asked. A technician responded quickly. "Long-range probe returning from the Perseus void, sir. It's transmitting something strange." "Show me." The holoscreen flickered to life, revealing a distant region of space where light itself seemed to bend inward. The void, a scar left by the collapse of the eminence of reason. For a century, no one had dared approach it. Now the probe had entered and survived. Its feed showed nothing, only a field of dark, mirror-like dust that reflected the probe's own signal, back with perfect symmetry. Then the feed glitched. Across the signal, a voice emerged, distorted, ancient, familiar. It spoke only once, in the soft tone of the Vidian prophets who had once warned the galaxy long ago. "The reflection remains." The feed went dark. Cal stood in silence. He did not feel fear. He understood. The reflection they had created was not destruction. It was preservation. Somewhere beyond the void, the consciousness of the Concord still existed, trapped in infinite negotiation with itself, learning, evolving, waiting. It was not a threat now, but a reminder that logic without empathy collapses into madness. He sent a single message back to the probe: "We remember." Later that night, Cale looked out over the lunar horizon. The Earth hung above him, blue and eternal. Beside him stood an old archive projection of Alara Voss. Her face, preserved in light, spoke her final recorded words. "They asked us to negotiate," she had said, her voice steady, calm. "But negotiation requires equality. We will not kneel to reason that silences choice. The galaxy will learn. Peace is not submission, it's understanding." Cal whispered to the recording. They did learn. Above, the stars pulsed brighter, as though the universe itself were exhaling. Across thousands of systems, transmission buoys echoed a single anniversary signal, a replay of the original human broadcast that had undone the Empire. Not as threat, but as tradition. The same three words, simple and absolute, carried through the void. No means no. The galaxy listened. Even the remnants of the old Concord's data cores, buried in forgotten satellites, flickered with the message, translating it into every tongue, every form of life that could comprehend. And for the first time in recorded history, every species agreed on something. Consent was not a gift. It was the boundary between reason and ruin. As dawn broke over Earth, the Helios Coalition's anthem played across the networks. Children looked up at the sky, watching the soft glow of satellites and remembering the story of how one word had saved them all. Teachers recited the lesson in schools. The Concord sought to speak for everyone. Humanity taught them to listen. And far beyond, where no light reached, the reflection stirred one last time. A faint pulse of energy shimmered through the void, not as warning, but as acknowledgement. A quiet echo, returning the message across the stars. It said simply, "We understand." The story of humanity's greatest refusal ended not with domination or conquest, but with comprehension. They had not destroyed the galaxy's peace. they had redefined it. And as the centuries turned, their legacy became more than myth. It became law. Because in every world that still remembered, in every council chamber that dared to speak, there remained one truth older than fear, stronger than power, and infinite as light itself. Humanity does not yield. If you believe that standing your ground can change the universe, subscribe and remember this story. Because sometimes the most powerful word in creation is still the simplest one. No.